Hello, Mundo Enneagram friends. I am Uranio Paes, and today our monthly live class will be a little bold and especially controversial. It seems that in some last years I've been specializing in getting a little controversial when it comes to speak the truth of what I believe is right and my own truth, even though that sometimes goes against some other views and approaches on the Enneagram field. I want to tell you all that I'll offer my 2 cents on my views on Enneagram theory in ways that are respectful, at least this is my intention, to other views. My assumption is that it's about time for us on the Enneagram to confront different theory views, and to be able to talk in a higher level about what we believe is accurate and what isn't, in our view, in Enneagram theory. And I don't mean that I'm any kind of owner of the truth, just that I want to contribute to a very important discussion. In my view, we all need to remember that the Enneagram is and should always be above each of us, and that if we are true Enneagram teachers and students, we need to stay open to having our theories tested and verified. This is at least, the very least, what it means to be serious when working. So I thought that I could systematize and to summarize some of my main concerns in terms of Enneagram theories that get spread around in one short talk. And this is what I'm going to do today. I called it the 5 main Enneagram theory mistakes. And please, all of you who's following live, and we have many live participants today, please, if you want, just write down on the chat tool here on this the Zoom video any questions you may have. I'll try to get to them towards the end of my presentation. Okay, and I'll try to share some few slides that I produced to help us here. Bear with me. I'm trying to share them. Let's see. Yeah, I think this will work. And let me have my video large. Yeah, okay. Let's try. So what is mistake number 1, in my view? I called it instincts are not subtypes, and both are very important. Both are key. So I think that this mistake number 1 is really widespread, and in different ways, depending on the Enneagram teacher and depending on the approach that is behind the teaching. So first thing to talk about regarding this is that instincts and subtypes are not the same thing. And many people talk about them as if they were the same thing. And one other very unfortunate thing on Enneagram theory is that very often teachers and practitioners of all kinds that want to establish their brands, they come up with different terminology from the one that existed before. Sometimes this also comes, in my view, from unfortunate disputes that exist between particular teachers and schools. That happened in the past with some of the first schools, but unfortunately keeps happening, and if not even worse right now. So there is either a rivalry that doesn't do us good, or a willingness to establish our own approach, our own brand, that make us create new names for things that are actually old, instead of just coming back to the original authors and the classics and just standing with the terminology they created for the sake of everyone and for the sake of the readers and for the sake of the students all around. I'm a little critical of this. I like to follow the classics and to avoid creating any new Enneagram term unless I think it has not been talked about yet, or that it's really necessary to convey a different understanding. But because of terminology, but not only this, because also of different understandings, many people have been talking about instincts and subtypes as being the same thing, and they are not. So what are the differences? Well, the instincts are on the animal soul level, as Gurdjieff used to talk about this. It's only in the physical centers. Gurdjieff was used to say that there are three physical centers: the moving center, the instinctual center, and the sexual center. And instincts belong almost solely to those realms. And they have different dimensions in the studies. In the studies of, there are different dimensions to talk about when talking about instincts, but they are in their roots really something coming from the primitive old brain, the reptilian brain, and the physical centers, as in Gurdjieff. While subtypes are already a mix between instincts and the lower emotional center and the lower heart that carries the passions on the Enneagram system. So subtypes talk about ways that passion of that type gets channeled through the instinctual drives. And these are quite different. So basically, we have 6 different instinctual sequences, and we have 27 different subtypes, meaning that there is one dominant, and 3 possibilities of dominant instincts for each of the 9 types. 9 times 3 is 27. But instincts, when we talk about instincts, it's another thing that exists in parallel to the 9 types. So we talk about the instinctual sequences only. Then another thing is that they are both important. So depending on the teacher and the school, the tendency is to talk about instincts only or about subtypes only. And we see this all the time. And by the way, whenever this happens, the teacher says, well, instincts are not important, subtypes are. There's not much to say about instincts. Or on the other case, subtypes are not important, only instincts are, and subtype is a misleading thing. And in my view, both instincts and subtypes are very important, and they need to be considered together. We should never approach them or talk about them alone, because then mistakes are made. So for instance, when we talk about instincts only, we will overgeneralize what being self-pressed dominant means, or what being sexual dominant or social dominant means. But also when we talk about the lowest instinct, self-pressed, sexual, and social being low or repressed, as I call them, we also tend sometimes to overgeneralize what happens. And it depending on the person's type, that is not the end behavior. That doesn't ring true for some types. And then if we don't study subtypes and understand that there is something called the countertypes, then countertype is one of the dominant instincts, or one of the 3 subtypes of each type, having a paradox in the inside, that while the passion tries to go one way, the instinct, the dominant instinct, tries to go the other way. So it generates a paradoxical thing in the inside. And when that happens, usually if we concentrate on talking about instincts only, we make mistakes. Now, on the very same way, if we talk about subtypes and don't consider instincts, we do some overgeneralizations. Like when we talk about this subtype being like this, that subtype being like that, we are not really considering the differences when that particular dominant subtype has a different second instinct on the sequence, or a different low instinct on the sequence, or a repressed instinct. So for instance, when we talk about sevens, if we talk about sexual 7 or a social 7 being very idealistic, which they tend to be, but then are they really that idealistic when self-preservation instinct is very high in second place and almost close to the first one? Maybe not. I know some 7s who are not very idealistic, although they are sexual dominants, because they have a very strong second self-preservation instinct. And self-preservation 7s are very pragmatic, very opportunistic, individualistic, and so on. So that doesn't allow them to be that idealistic, although their first instinct it brings them a tendency to be so. So it's very bad to talk about one of these dimensions alone and to try to say that one of these approaches is better than the other. It's very dangerous. And mistakes are made not only in what we say, but also in interpreting someone's type. So typing mistakes become really frequent when we don't consider instincts and subtypes. And this is also because behind this problem of talking about either instincts or subtypes alone, behind this, there is an even bigger mistake that many of us Enneagram teachers have been making, or at least made in the past. And this is not to consider adequately the dimension of instincts and subtypes and try to attribute everything to type. So we've imagined that when talking about ones, we would say that all ones are extremely perfectionists or self-critical and so on. But that varies a lot according to instincts and subtypes of ones. So we make lots of mistakes in interpreting what happens to people if we try to attribute things to type that actually come from subtype and instincts. And then the lack of understanding that existed up to recently, and unfortunately up to today, for people who don't really exchange opinions in the Enneagram community, the lack of understanding about instincts and subtypes has led Enneagram teachers and authors to overvalue other parts of theory in wrong ways. So let me explain this better. When we study subtypes and instincts, we see that there are many important things to talk about people in these dimensions, and that types don't really explain it all. And then if we realized in the past that type didn't explain things completely, but we didn't know instincts and subtypes existed. So what did we do? We started looking for possible explanations of why people of the same type were different. And then whatever we could find, we used as a justification for the differences we were seeing. In wrong ways, because we didn't have the accurate theory on instincts and subtypes. So in practice, for instance, Enneagram literature has overemphasized the importance of the wings, at least in the first books. So a 5 is like this because of the 4 wing, and or because of the 6 wing, and an 8 with a 9 wing, they've been different from an 8 with a 7 wing. And although that exists, the importance of that is really not as big, in my view, as most of the old Enneagram books talked about. And please understand that when I say old Enneagram books, very unfortunately, these are still the versions available for sale in all languages, including English. Many times the books that are still sold do not represent very accurately the opinions of the authors nowadays, but they have not been updated for different reasons. And in other languages, it's even more concerning because many times only one version is made and then not updated. So I think you get my point. Let's go to mistake number 2. Tri-type is a dangerous distraction. I know this is very controversial, depending on where you come from. Tri-type may have become a big theory, and there are some very nice authors that talk about tri-type theory, and it's even embarrassing, or at least makes me feel sad that I need to talk about this in a very assertive way. I would rather not have to do that, but as I said, I want to produce good discussions, high-level discussions, and I would be willing to debate with whoever wants to debate about this. But in practice, tri-type leads people to lots of dangerous distractions. So why is that? And first, what is tri-type? Tri-type is an approach that says that we actually have 3 types instead of 1, or at least 3 passions instead of 1. Some people who talk about tri-type still say that there is 1 dominant type, but then they say there are 2 other types that are very strong for us. And they can be any of the other 2 triads, 2 centers of intelligence. So, and other approaches say that there are 3 types, period. And there is no such a thing like 1 being more important than the other 2 in the tri-type. So why am I so much against this? Because there are reasons of origin in how ego is created for us to have only 1 passion among the 9 emotions. So although we have the 9 emotions, only 1 of them really becomes a passion, and in terms of really controlling us big time. So I think I'm bringing good news. I'm saying that our problems around 8 of the 9 are not as big. At the same time, we have one extremely big problem with the passion of our type. I used to say sometimes that we have traits of all points, but we have only 1 type. Or we have all 9 emotions, but only 1 passion, meaning that there is 1 emotion we need to concentrate fully on if we want to grow up. And the reasons behind this, I won't be able to talk about them today. We maybe can talk about this some other time on Mundo Enneagramma, but it comes from why there are 9 types and not 10 or 8. And the diagram, the Enneagram's diagram itself. Because when we talk about tri-type, we're disconsidering the Enneagram symbol. And people who talk about tri-type usually don't really talk about the arrows. And they are very important. So I can be a 3, 7, 8 on tri-type. And where are the arrows between these 3 types? So I find it very distracting. And in practice, everybody has 1 passion that is completely not in control, usually when the person has not done enough inner work. And if we have this person look into 3 emotions instead of 1, what will happen? What will happen is quite simply that the person will never get to the point she needs to get in terms of personal evolution. And also, this is a distraction because tri-type theory leads people to keep all the time talking about how do I look like, or what is my personality, instead of making the most critical question, which is, how can I overcome my personality? Given what I am, how can I go beyond it? So the Enneagram is not only a typology, it's a system for inner work, for self-growth. And tri-type theory misleads us in other directions, in my view. So the one passion of our type deserves almost all our attention because it's very hard to work on it. It has very subtle manifestations. And make sure that you read the 9 articles we had on the indirect manifestations of passions, of each of the 9 passions here on Mundo Enneagramma. Last year, we published a series of articles on this. So if we don't completely focus on the passion of our type, we'll never get there. And it is way too easy for people who work with tri-types to jump to a supposedly second or third type in order to explain our tendencies, instead of looking at other parts of theory, like instincts and subtypes. And even worse, it's way too easy to jump to a second or third type in the tri-type in order to avoid staying in touch with our biggest shadows. So when the discussion about that type I am becomes hard, and I need to face very dark content, I'll just go to a second tri-type and spend some time there. It's very convenient, isn't it? And then I just want to say that when it comes to theory of all kinds, and especially Enneagram theory, because the Enneagram is a sacred system, it's very dangerous to be over creative, to come up with new theories that produce bad effects. Food for thought. Now, mistake number 3. There is no such a thing as a good and a bad arrow. So all types have 2 arrows on the Enneagram symbol. And I'm talking about the inner lines or the inner Enneagram. 2 connecting points. And in most cases, in most books, we talk about the arrow against, when we are on our type and we go to the arrow against, that being the security point. And when we go with the arrow, that would be the stress point or the action point. And I'll try to say all that I think in here, and also a very very widespread approach on this was saying that we would do integration when going against the arrow and disintegration when going with the arrow. And many books still say this, at least in their versions. So let me explain a few things. First is, there was, in the early 70s, not 80s, so there is a mistake here, I'm sorry. There was a very unfortunate historic confusion that happened. And I'll very briefly tell you what that is. So Claudio Naranjo, after coming from Arica in Chile, back to Berkeley, where he taught and lived, he started gathering people in a living room to share a little bit of that wonderful system that Oscar Ichazo had introduced him to. And he would explore that in his constant willingness to understand things. And Naranjo is a social 5, right? So he was exploring all that, and he would bring in people and talk and ask, and he was at the same time creating the model in his head and also, you know, sharing his teachings, which is also very common for a social 5, and I know a lot about this type because I'm one. And then in a certain point, Naranjo said something about the arrows that was understood as integration and disintegration by one person that was present to one of the meetings, and not many, who was a Jesuit. And this man took all possible notes of everything that Claudia was saying. And then there was this thing about against the arrows being good and with the arrows being bad, and integration and disintegration. But that was not exactly what Claudio Naranjo was saying. And if he was saying things in a confusing way, and whoever knows Claudio will know that he can be confusing many times. So it was not a complete theory for Claudio yet. We're talking about the beginning of the 70s, okay? Not 80s as written in here. Then this Jesuit had all these notes. And the Jesuit community works like this. One person spreads something and whew, all over the world, the Jesuits know it. And he took his notes to the Jesuit community. And everybody based their theories on those notes. And they were wrong. And one of the persons who got in touch with these notes was Don Richard Rizzo, who was a Jesuit at that point. And he wrote his books based on this theory, and it took him decades, together with my friend Russ, to review the theory, seeing that it was not quite accurate. And they came up later with their own models to correct the theory. But then the books were already widespread. And then it's useful to know that it was a simple misunderstanding that produced what is actually a mistake of people thinking that one arrow is good and the other is bad. To talk about arrows as integration and disintegration, therefore, is often misleading. Forget about these names, okay? They are not used anymore. And to talk about security, the arrow against, and stress, the arrow with, is also often misleading. Why is that? It's because although if we understand these two concepts correctly, they are right, although they are right, these are not the points that we need to talk about when talking about arrows. What are the points then? The arrows should be seen more as resources for growth. So if we keep talking about security and stress, we will keep talking about involuntary movements that we have going to one arrow or another. And this is not inner work, and not what the Enneagram is about. We'll keep talking about what happens to us when we are very unconscious. When there is security or stress, we react some ways. And this is not the point. The true question behind the arrows should be, how can I use those 2 points as conscious resources for my growth and for overcoming the fixation I have in my one type? So mistake number 4, centers of intelligence. Most teachers in schools talk about centers of intelligence, but in terms of we all have one dominant center of intelligence. And then there are very brief explanations about what it means to belong, to be from one of those triads where that is the dominant center of intelligence. Right, so there is much more to talk about centers of intelligence, and I mean much more. So first thing, we need to understand what being a mental type, a heart type, and a head type really means. And I've recently recorded 3 different classes like this one here on Mundo Enneagramma about each of these intelligences. Make sure you watch them. Now, there's another thing, though, that we need to do. We need to understand that the centers of intelligence should be studied so that we grow up in our levels of awareness, and that there is a connection between centers of intelligence and levels of awareness. So talking about centers without talking about the necessary balancing of centers is shallow, too shallow. So it's not enough to say that we have a dominant center. We need to say, how can I develop the other 2? How can I start not allowing my dominant one to steal energy from the other 2? How can I be a more complete human being by having the 3, right? By the way, Gurdjieff would say that when the human being balances the 3 centers and starts using the 3 almost equally, this is when inner work starts. This is what Gurdjieff said, right? So there's a whole new world for us to explore after doing that. So we need to start doing it. And talking about the balancing of the centers should imply talking about what other center needs to get activated when we reach another point on our path. So let me explain this. If we are on a certain point on our path and we want to go further, we need to know what new center of intelligence we will need to activate that is not yet activated, is still passive. So there is a hierarchy of what centers of intelligence get activated as we go in each step. And this is for all 9 types, all 27 subtypes. So there is a sequence of development of active centers. So the theory of centers of intelligence has a very intimate connection to the theory of levels of awareness. But unfortunately, not many people tell us so. And I'm together with B. Chestnut in our new Chestnut Paes Enneagram Academy, we are integrating this approach of centers in all our teachings as a central spine of what we teach. And we believe this is very important. And then it's really necessary to talk about Gurdjieff, because his theory on centers is way more complete and profound than what contemporary Enneagram books say about centers. Then mistake number 5. So there is only one Enneagram diagram, and it's the one on the left-hand side of your screen, with this void in between 4 and 7, with these 2 lines connecting 4 to 2 and 5 to 7. And this other diagram here is not the Enneagram diagram. It's something else. And some teachers who have been talking about the harmonics or who have been talking about different aspects of sacred geometry have been emphasizing a lot the second symbol right now. This beautiful star that is actually the 3 equilateral triangles superposing, okay? If you see it here. And it's not this symbol on the left. So what I'm saying is that only the one in the left is the Enneagram symbol. And what is this one? This one is just a representation that the Enneagram's inner triangle rotates. And when it rotates clockwise, 3, 6, 9 becomes 4, 7, 1. Then more clockwise, it becomes 5, 8, 2. Or it can go counterclockwise and become the same triangles. So this diagram is a diagram that contains only 2 of the 3 geometric figures that the Enneagram symbol has. So it has only the circle and the triangle, just that the Enneagram is showing that the triangle rotates. But where is the hexad in it? The hexad is this periodic figure here, 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7, and it's not existent in the second diagram. So I am in favor, and let me say this very clearly because I started being criticized by people who don't understand my point when I talk about this. I'm in favor of us talking about the harmonics. I like the harmonics approach. What I don't like is when people start promoting this diagram as if it was the Enneagram's diagram. And many people just think it's beautiful, or they think that it explains some new things, and they just throw in a trash bin things that are extremely important, like this void between 4 and 5, which has to do with the dark night of the soul in our journey, or this heptagon here in the middle that has many different meanings. It doesn't exist in here. So please don't mess up with Enneagram theory. Don't try to be too creative. Stick with the origins, stick with this symbol. And when talking about the harmonics, if you show the second diagram, make sure you say it's not the Enneagram's diagram. And just as a surprise, as I did some other times, I'd like to say there is a 6th mistake. And instead of 5, a surprise mistake. And this is the mistake whenever someone says like this, my approach is the only one that's valid. And I think this is a theoretical mistake, ontological mistake, because it's a mistake of how to deal with knowledge. It's a mistake about not putting your own theory to be tested by other people, and also not being open enough to whatever has been said and whatever is new. And unfortunately, this is still very common. And I am not talking about only Enneagram schools here. Very unfortunately, I am talking even more so about wisdom schools when I say this. So Gurdjieffians from more classic fourth way schools or Gurdjieff institutes throughout the world, they come and say that they don't know the contemporary Enneagram and the typology, and they don't like it. So how can you don't like it if you don't know it? How can you not get involved and see if it works or not? You know, there are very good exceptions, I can say. But many people have this, unfortunately, approach of just going against what's not what I say, right? And then also many contemporary Enneagram people that work with the typology look back at Gurdjieffian work and say, oh, that's not valid. Only this Enneagram that talks about types is interesting. And it's too complex, so let me forget about it. So it's, you know, it's a very bad moment in society when we are almost giving up thinking and making efforts, mental efforts to consider other hypotheses, you know, and to keep making our theories evolve, right? And then there is the historic thing about religions and spiritual paths and esoteric paths saying, I am the one, I am the best one, I'm the valid one. So I won't mention names, but I've been with absolutely brilliant teachers that after a while, I would become very disappointed because the general speech would become, this is what's right, all the other approaches are wrong. And I think this is a sign of a low collective level of awareness. behind what's been said. And because there may be a big individual level of awareness within a very low collective level of awareness. And we'll talk more about that sometime. So why do so many Enneagram schools and wisdom schools say they have the formula and others don't? And what are the risks of such affirmations? And can we stay critical to this? And can we do better in our collective level of awareness? So I know there is at least one comment and one question, and I'll stop sharing the screen and see what that is and talk about it. Anyway, I hope that with this presentation we are fostering high-level debates, right? This is at least my intention. So on the chat, Felicia, hi Felicia, yes, so jumping off now because you catch a flight. Thank you for being here always, Felicia. Have a good flight. So we don't actually have questions, at least so far. We have a big audience participating live, and I thank all of you for participating live. And I just want to remember, to remind you all that you can watch many times this presentations on our website. It goes usually to the website the next day or so, or even before that. So many times people tell me how good it is to watch it later, because you can pause and then you can make notes or stop to do something else and come back later. And I was especially happy the other day when a student said that she was managing to replace her Netflix series for some more Mundo Enneagrama sessions in her house, even right after dinner with her family. So why not? And then I just want to tell you all that Chestnut and I are offering new trainings. We are extremely excited with these new trainings. And in the next 2 weeks time, we will be teaching in California our retreat A, which is the first retreat of our what we call our personal mastery program. And if you are interested, please come join us. Go to Bee's website, beatricechestnut.com, and see all the description of the courses and conditions and so on. And then we'll have other trainings later this year in June and October. So pay attention to that, because we're coming up with new exciting trainings. So thank you all for your time. I hope you have enjoyed and benefited from this talk, and stay tuned on Mundo Enneagrama.